Welcome to our bite-sized episodes of the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast, brought to you direct from the CRiC Conference 2024. Enjoy this episode. Welcome back. This is the last bite-sized episode that we're recording. So for context for the listeners, it's 3:30 on Sunday afternoon. Everyone's getting a little bit tired, a little bit fatigued. But we just had a whirlwind presentation from our guest in this final bite-sized session, Noel Dempsey. Welcome to the podcast. Incredible performance at 3:30 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. Yeah. Really just a breath of fresh air, at the end of the day, something really inspiring, really interesting. And we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of what you've just spoken about at the CRiC conference, but let's start with you. So a little bit about your background in coaching, in academia, your work in sport coaching, broadly speaking, and then we can get into your work.
Yeah, no, thank you. I guess I'm currently a senior lecturer at the University Campus of Football Business, or UCFB, based in Manchester, where I teach across kind of football coaching and football coaching management. I guess how I came to be there is that I undertook and completed a PhD last year on a jointly funded PhD project between Liverpool John Moores and the English Football Association. Throughout that, I've been a kind of qualified teacher and coach. I'm a UEFA A licensed coach, and since I guess returning from living in Australia and moving up to Manchester kind of 12 years ago, I've worked at a kind of number of academies. I've worked for the English Football Association as a coach developer and coach mentor, and now my current practitioner role is that I am a coach at Manchester City, and I work within their selects provision, which is basically their internal development centre, which is really crucial for me in terms of my teaching with regards to the bespokeness of the courses that we run at UCFB. My PhD fortunately was funded, and it looked at exploring formal coach education of grassroots or participatory domain courses. And I did that with Dr Reece Chapman as well on that. We sat on the same project. We ran parallel PhDs, so yeah, that's a whistle-stop tour.
Yeah, that's good. No, it's good. Let me just pick up on that. You sort of ran parallel PhDs. Yeah. How helpful was that for you on just that experience of getting through a PhD? Because we all know it's challenging.
Yeah, I mean, me and Reece are pretty much like family now, because when you spend kind of 5.5, 6 years kind of together, despite the kind of geographical difference of where we were based in terms of Manchester and up here in Newcastle, we certainly pulled each other through. There were times when at the PhD process, and I'm sure, hopefully kind of people coming to the back end or just finished can resonate that it's really hard, it's really tough, but we had great support networks, both from our liaison at the FA and also, I have to say Dr. Colin Cronin, also Professor Dave Richardson, Dave Morley and Martin Littlewood. They were all really, really good in terms of just keeping us ticking along. Yeah. Incredibly helpful, and I was incredibly fortunate to be able to undertake such an illuminating project. Really, they opened their doors, which not many NGBs do.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. Which has been a bit of a theme of the conference. Early on Friday, when we talking with Wayne Ellison about it being a bit of a surprise, to have someone like that come and ask someone from academia to come in and do the work. So a real, I guess, privileged, lucky position. But nice to see that connection between academia and what's going on in practice, and obviously your background and your work with the FA was really helpful there. So for the listeners then, I've just talked about the fact this was a whirlwind performance on a Sunday afternoon. Yeah. So give us a little bit of context. What was it that you've just presented, some of the key findings out of it, and of course your experiences of doing it as well?
Yeah, so I presented basically an idea that I wanted to formulate as a kind of reconstructing tool to think about in terms of a metaphor, sort of selection box metaphor. And that came out the back end of my PhD, having spent 5 years really deconstructing policy, being quite critical of policy, which we're expected to do in academia. But I also resonated with the fact that these coaches are trying their best, coach developers are trying their best. How can I offer potentially something that we can maybe carry coach education forward? So the presentation was around some of the initial findings of that deconstruction of coach education policy, namely at the time of level 1 and level 2. And then really just posing the idea of what selection box means. And, for people watching and listening, selection box is kind of those assorted chocolate boxes that you get over Christmas that you get to pick and choose. And the idea fundamentally is that, well, why can't we make coach education more about having choice, space and time, that the learner has more power to decide on those certain elements. And it drew out of kind of the theoretical ideas of Basil Bernstein, and I guess his kind of socio-educational lens of, I guess, just deconstructing the structural barriers within policy. And that's not to negate that some of the structures are needed and not all structures are bad, but that actually if we're truly about being learner-centered and actually at the heart of any curriculum design, learning is about developing and co-creating this process of learning. It therefore has to be meaningful to the learner, and therefore that means that they have to have a say. And in the vast majority of kind of, the literature, it often comes out that, well, actually they don't. They might maybe perceive to be, but actually through course design, they don't actually have that much power in the form of choice or agency. So yeah, I used the selection box to just try and obviously illuminate that choice and this idea of, and I'm sorry nobody got to obviously eat the chocolates, I'm really sorry. But it was just this idea that if we were to give them more choice and power, could we reorientate the system?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's where we are.
And so just to touch on that, again, for context for listeners, physical selection boxes in the presentation room, but we weren't allowed to stick our hands in and pull out a twirl or anything like that from the box, unfortunately.
Sorry.
But something really helpful, I think, and something really resonated was just this idea of using a metaphor like that to get across some of the ideas of theoretical positions that are probably a little bit more complex. You can really drown in some of Basil's ideas. Really difficult to make sense of them, but just the way you presented the selection box stuff, it started to ring true for me then. It started to kind of make it a little bit more palatable, a little bit more understandable, which was great. So really enjoyed that. I had one question, I suppose, that was a little bit more of a challenge, I suppose.
Yeah, good.
I was too nervous to ask it in front of everyone else. You talked quite a lot about, giving learners the agency and that opportunity to choose what they want to do and equally to decide what they don't want to do. Mm-hmm. Why learner-centered? Why not learning-centered? And I guess if we go a little bit more along that spectrum of being more learner-centered to give them that choice, do we not draw away some agency from the people who are in knowledgeable positions to be able to support and challenge coaches to be better versions of themselves?
No, absolutely, and it's a fair kind of point and question. I think maybe I got hung up on the language of learner or learning. I think the idea is that this selection box doesn't mean that the learner has absolute free reign of whatever they get to choose when, but actually that by this genuine process approach, that they would build rapport with the system, with coach developers that might be on different modules, and they would trust those to say, do you know what, we think you need this. So it's the needs and the wants, right?
Yeah, of course.
Some things you have to give as a need versus what they might want. But I think by having a system where they do have that little bit more power, I'd be really surprised, and again, in my experiences, I've taken loads of kind of learning, probably more informally or non-formally, where people have gone, do you know what, I jumped on this, or you need to go and speak to so-and-so, go and do it. And you go, really? And you go, I didn't really think about it, but go on, I'll give it a go. And I think that's the direction of it. But ultimately, it's up to the learner. And we're also kind of dealing within the system and the context that I was speaking about was this participatory domain. A lot of national governing bodies, run now online courses that maybe a day, maybe two, and then effectively you never have to do one again. Well, part of the idea of selection box is that by creating that space and time, that they will want to engage in learning. And if they choose not to, okay, because not everyone is. And this can't be everything to all people all of the time. Yeah. But just that idea of creating a system that is far more collaborative, far more process driven, well, hopefully, and I guess we had the challenge in there, right, this is us changing a culture of the system. Yeah. And this is definitely not an easy win. And as I said, this is not a silver bullet. We don't just bang selection box down and all the problems are solved. Yeah. But I do think it just provides us with another lens or a different viewpoint to go, this system could be really different. Yeah.
And I think when you were talking about that idea of really imagining something a bit different, it just reminded me of what Robin was talking about with Charlie in the session on SCR on Friday, about your research being a bit more imaginative and about being a little bit more forward thinking rather than being so hyperly sort of like deconstructing what's there and actually can we go the other way. And so when you spoke about that, I thought, oh, bloody hell, we are thinking about doing things just differently here, trying to reimagine and recontextualise what it is we're doing.
Yeah.
So that was great. One of the common themes about within a lot of the presentations and a lot of the keynotes has been impact. So as a result of doing this work and reconceptualising and using that metaphor, what's the impact been for you? Have you had any impacts through your findings? Have you been able to get some of this stuff into practice and into policy where it's difficult to move?
So as it currently stands, this selection box is still very much in its infancy in terms of, I've not even finished writing the actual position paper, we'll call it.
Okay.
And it was something like CRiC, and again, so blessed and at this time of year to be able to come here and pose this idea, to then have critical conversations to go, look, are there legs here? Is it something that people want to do? And I think that experience of, and Anna alluded to it this morning, where you're not likely to see the dividends of your work for maybe a decade. But we've got to start at some point, and Anna's work has been sensational, right, in terms of the coach learning and the filtering. But it's only now that it's being picked up. So if I can continue this kind of discourse of this is what selection box means to me, what does it maybe mean to you? How can we collaborate on this? I'm aware that NGBs and government, they have constraints, so it can't be entirely how I imagine. But if we can get into rooms and have dialogue that gets them to think about this in a different way, then that's going to be impact for me. What that then looks like for the learner down the line, who knows? If anything, because we also know that research is often not necessarily forgotten, but industry moves so quickly and people move on from industry so quickly that it's really hard to kind of get your thumb down and go, no, look, let's explore this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's probably where we also, and this is alluded to, I guess, across the conference, that we need to do better, or how can we do this better as academics? How can we bring this work? How can we translate this work for you to kind of get you to buy in a lot quicker and a lot earlier? And that's the challenges for all of us. And I think that's something that I'm probably going to enter over the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess what's been slightly different as well, you finished your presentation with some questions, with some things that are facilitating some thinking and some discussion. Why did you think that was so valuable at a place like CRiC, for example?
Well, I think, this has been a wonderful space over the last kind of 2.5 days. Tiring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Emotionally and cognitively draining, but the whole aspect of CRiC is to consider things in a critical manner. And I wanted to pose those questions at the end, because this is not the finished article. It's something that, come at me, let's have this discussion. And it's because CRiC is probably such a space that I feel very comfortable in. And that doesn't mean I can sit back and lay back and no one's going to challenge. It's like, I know they're going to do it for the right reasons. I know they're going to do it in the right way. Yeah. And it's not for ego's sake. It's for, no, you might have something here, or actually, I don't think you've got something here, but have you thought about this? And that's only going to further my thinking. Yeah. And my support mechanisms, and CRiC has always been great for that. I've been very fortunate to go to a number of these conferences, and this year I think has kind of exceeded that, and it's felt like a real. It was alluded to earlier around this. It's a real community, and I think part of that community is to then go, no, I'm gonna stick it on you now, and let's go. Yeah. Let's really dive into this, take a deep dive, which is exactly what we need to do so that we can make things better for coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, just for context for the listeners, as we try and wrap up this bite-sized episode, we came out of your presentation and you've got 4 or 5 people queuing up to come and have a chat. Yeah. No doubt, as soon as you walk out the door here, there's going to be a line of them like, where's Neil? I want to go.
They're probably slagging me off because I didn't give them the chocolates. But
well, maybe. But they absolutely want to pick your brains. I think it was a great way to finish off that particular parallel session. It was awesome. We're really grateful of the 10 or 15 minutes you've given to us now.
Thank you so much for your time.
It's... keep in touch with us on the work, and we'd absolutely love to have you back on the podcast for a full episode, because I think it deserves a little bit more airtime than a bite-sized ep. But thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Enjoy the last little bit of the conference.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you want to know a little bit more about CRiC, head to the website at cricsportcoaching.com, and you can follow along on Twitter as well at @cric_SCR.